Okay, this is going through the Chapter 23 review test. So consider the basic ADEAS model. Suppose there is a rising percentage of high school graduates that are illiterate, resulting in a decrease of average labor productivity. This will change, will. So this is talking about aggregate supply because it has nothing to do with the demand side of the economy. It's only talking about supply. And what it's saying is that we can supply less at any given price level because our productivity has decreased as a whole. So that means that our AS curve is going to shift to the left. That one's not too bad. Consider the AD curve in a simple macro model. When there is a change in autonomous desired expenditure, the simple multiplier is equal to the ratio of the horizontal shift of the AD curve to the change in autonomous expenditure. So it's always going to be a horizontal shift because shifting the aggregate expenditure function up and down is going to shift the AD curve left and right. So that's why it's going to be a horizontal shift. And we know that the change in aggregate expenditure is related to the multiplier. So that's just going to be however much it moves up in relation to the multiplier is how much it's going to move to the side. Which of the following correctly describes one reason why the aggregate demand curve slopes downwards? So if we graph this out in Paint, the aggregate demand curve looks something like that. AD. And it's measured with Y, which is real GDP, and price level. So what we notice is decreases in the price level cause increases in private sector wealth, which lead to increases in desired consumption. So when our prices go down, our consumption is going to go up. Consumption going up is going to make AE go up. And remember that when AE goes up, this is AE, that makes AD go right. So if we were originally here and then prices went up, remember that when prices go up, we don't actually shift our curve, we just move down onto a new point. The aggregate expenditure curve shifts because the aggregate expenditure is just for one price level. There's a different curve for every price level, but with the aggregate demand curve, we have one curve for every price level because that's just what it maps. It maps the changes in price level. So that's why it slopes downwards. Next question. Okay, this one is kind of tricky. Assume the economy is initially in equilibrium with desired aggregate expenditure equal to real GDP at point V. So point V is right here. Then it says the price level is P0. So coming down here, P0, we're going to be here because if we track down from V, we intersect the aggregate demand curve at point B. Now there is an exogenous rise in the price level to P1. Which of the following statements describes the likely macroeconomic effects? So the price level rises to P1. Remember that there's a different aggregate expenditure curve for every price level, and if price level rises, that means consumption falls, in which case our aggregate expenditure also falls, so we're going to go to AE1. Now our new equilibrium is where the aggregate expenditure function intersects with the 45-degree line where AE equals Y at point U. Dragging down, we're going to end up at point A. Remember, we're not moving our aggregate demand curve because aggregate demand doesn't shift with a change in price level. It's the same for every price level. So we come up here to point A, and that's the final answer. Curve shifts to AE1 downwards, a new equilibrium is established at point U. The economy moves from point B to point A along the curve. Other things being equal, what is the effect of an exogenous rise in domestic price level? So if prices go up or we have inflation, all of our real money is going down. The value of it is less, right? If you have $5 and today you can buy 5 donuts because donuts are $1, but then tomorrow all prices rise and now donuts cost $2. Now you can only buy 2.5 donuts. You can't buy 5 donuts anymore. So the money, your real money that you have, or anything that's denominated in money units, is going to go down. Why it says denominated money units, your house, for instance, is an asset that you own, but it's not denominated in real money units, and if all prices went up, then the price of your house would go up as well, so it wouldn't be affected. Suppose that the economy is initially in long-run equilibrium at potential output. A shock then hits the economy, and we observe that unemployment rate increases and the price level decreases. Okay, so when we're talking about shocks in the economy, we are always talking about a shock to aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is always the one that is going to move unless it says so. So this is our aggregate demand and supply function. Aggregate demand, aggregate supply. Right now we're in long run equilibrium right here at potential output, or Y star. This is measured with Y and P. And now it says that unemployment rate rises and price level decreases. So unemployment, just think about it like inflationary or recessionary, right? So if we have a recessionary gap, if we have a recession, that means people aren't employed, right? So that naturally means that because our unemployment rate has increased, we've opened up a recessionary gap. So we know that AD moves, and we know that it goes downwards to create that recessionary gap. Remember, anything on this side of potential output is a recessionary gap, RG, and anything on this side of potential output is an inflationary gap. So right now our short run equilibrium is right here. So right now we're in a short run recessionary gap, at which point price level has fallen, as you can see from there, and unemployment rate has risen because we're in a recession. And that was aggregate demand that shifted. In the long run, what's going to happen is our aggregate demand is usually the one shifting. Aggregate supply, unless it's the government, it's always aggregate supply that is going to bring us back to equilibrium. So our long run equilibrium has to be here. So that means our aggregate supply function in the long run is going to look like this. AS2. This is AD2. So in the long run, our aggregate supply function is going to shift left. So why is that happening? So we're in a recession. So that means that there is a downward pressure on wages. Nobody has any jobs, but everyone wants them. So employers are inclined to pay people less money, because if you won't accept a lower wage, they'll just fire you and hire someone that will. So what happens is wages adjust over time so that everyone, wages, there's a downward pressure on wages. So when wages fall, now they get to pay everyone a lower wage, and we come back here to long run equilibrium once they start paying everyone those lower wages. Now there's a concept called sticky wages. Sticky wages is saying sticky wages. The principle of sticky wages is that we come out of recessions a lot slower than we do inflationary gaps. And the reason for that is, if we had the opposite, if we had an inflationary gap, there would be an upward pressure on wages. More people would want raises, and they would be getting them. And then eventually our aggregate supply curve would shift left, because employers can only pay so many people higher wages. The problem with the other way around is not many people like to take pay cuts. So wages shift downwards really slowly, and this may be an example where government fiscal policy is needed. Excuse me. Consider the net export function and the AE curve in a simple macro model with demand-determined output. What is the effect of an exogenous increase in domestic price level? So, the price level went up. What does that mean? That means that our goods are less attractive to foreigners. Now we know our equation for AE is going to equal C plus I plus G plus I minus X. This is sometimes also just NX, but we'll break it up into imports minus exports. So if prices go up, what does that mean? Well, it means a couple things. It means our consumption is going to go down. It also means that our goods are less attractive to foreigners. They're not only less attractive to us, they're less attractive to us, and that makes consumption fall, but also they're less attractive to foreigners, so our exports fall. So these two things, what happens? When our consumption falls, this number, our AE number, gets smaller, and when our exports fall, this, if it was a big number, let's say it was 5 and we're subtracting 5, now it's only 3, our AE is actually going to get bigger. But we assume that consumption is going to have a greater impact than exports will. Oh shit. Wait, just kidding. NX is not I minus X. It's X minus IM. That makes more sense. So that way, when our X goes down, AE also goes down. So both of these things are going down with AE. So that causes our AE curve to shift downwards. And naturally, because this is our net export function, our net export function is also going to go down. So both of these are going to shift downward. Next. Consider a simple macro model with demand determined output, an exogenous increase in the price level. So we just talked about this, how it's going to decrease the real value of wealth. It's going to decrease all of your assets denominated in money units. That's going to lead to a decrease in consumption because you're not able to buy as much. You can buy less. And it's going to shift the AE curve downward. We just showed that, so I'm not going to show it again. The aggregate supply curve relates the price level to the quantity of output that firms would like to produce and sell, given the assumption that the state of technology is constant and the prices of all factors are constant. That's just kind of something you should remember. It's saying that when we talked about it shifting because the wages shifted, so when the wages don't shift, it stays the same. That's why the prices of all factors are constant. Wages are a factor price. And the state of technology is constant. Technology is also a factor. So all factors are fixed. And lastly, which of the following is implied by a rightward shift in the economy's AS curve? So here, let's draw that over here. A rightward shift in the AS curve. So we have our AS model. AD. And here is potential output at Y star. This is graphed on Y, which is GDP, and the price level. So it says a rightward shift of the AS. So that is kind of downwards. Looks something like that. It's not too important. AS2. So what does that mean? So we notice that this is our old equilibrium. And here's our new equilibrium. So right now we've actually opened an inflationary gap, an IG, because we are to the left of potential output. So we notice that price level went down. So when the AS curve shifts right, we see decrease in price level. We're also seeing an increase in GDP, just because this has moved to the right. So what does that mean? Well, let's look at where the price level is. If we track over the same initial price level, I'll use a different color here. So at the initial price level, they were supplying this much output, right? Why? GDP is a measure of output, of the economy's output. But now at this new price level, we continue to track over, and now they're producing a larger amount of output at the same given price level. And that's it.